Good evening, and welcome to Tikvah's Yom HaAtzmaut Day of Learning. My name is Dodi Katz, and it is my honor to moderate our discussion this evening on behalf of Tikvah. This has been an exciting day for Tikvah to platform some of the most contemporary voices to reflect on the meaning and miracle that is modern Israel. Today's lineup featured Dan Senor, Rabbi Ari Lamb, Amiad Cohen, Shabbos Kestenbaum, and now our guest, Dr. Einat Wilf. There's no more fitting way to commemorate Israel's 77th birthday than recovering the ideas that animate it, the historical achievements that led to its founding, the tough defense that it needs to endure, and the civilizational purpose to which it is dedicated. This is a moment of great Zionist awakening and urgency, and learning is our way to honor the day. I am pleased to introduce our guest this evening, Dr. Einat Wilf, a leading thinker on Israel and Zionist thought. Dr. Wilf was a member of the Israeli parliament from 2010 to 2013, where she served as chair of the Education Committee and a member of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. Dr. Wilf is the author of 7 books, including her most recent, We Should All Be Zionists, and her co-authored book, The War of Return, How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream Has Obstructed the Path to Peace. Dr. Wilf was previously a visiting professor at Georgetown University, where she gave a seminar on Zionism and anti-Zionism. Tonight, Dr. Wilf will explore with us 3 key moments in Zionist history. After Dr. Wilf's presentation, we will have the opportunity to hear questions from some of our Tikvah students, and then, if time allows, entertain some questions via the chat box. Dr. Wilf, we are excited to learn with you.
Thank you. It's entirely my pleasure. I want to start with a remark about something else. When I studied, I took some courses in art history at Harvard in the mid-90s. It was the beginning of multiculturalism and postmodernism in academia. And studying art history was one of the main places where this happened, and it was all about kind of breaking the way that it was taught and comparing things that in the past weren't compared. And one of the main comments of the students at the end of the course, which was the traditional introduction to the history of art, was before you can break and critique and comment and relativize, could you just please teach us art history properly, what came before, what came later? So when I was approached by Tikvah to talk about 3 moments in Zionist history, I realized that what I was going to do is actually talk about the 3 key moments and not try to play around. So the 3 key moments I choose are, of course, 1897, 1917, and 1947. And I'll address each one in turn. I'm assuming you're quite educated about the event, so I'm going to focus more on what I think should be known and kind of what are the deeper aspects of each one of those dates. So first is 1897, of course, the First Zionist Congress. First, I want to use this moment to reflect on Herzl as a great figure. There are many ways to think about Herzl, but one of them is really as the kind of the first entrepreneur of the startup nation. There's a great Tikvah course by Daniel Polisar, I would highly recommend, about Herzl as kind of all the founding fathers rolled into one. But what the amazing thing is that his entire period of Zionist activism is about 9 years, of 1895 to 1904. And when you realize what he achieved in those 9 years, it kind of puts every entrepreneur to shame, including some of the big names that you would think of, from Steve Jobs to Jeff Bezos. So 1897, of course, is a key moment for him where he realizes that the people that he thought would embrace his vision of Zionism, the wealthy Jews, Baron Hirsch, the Rothschilds, essentially want nothing to do with his vision. he also begins to realize that the Jews of the West and Central Europe, France, Germany, Austria, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, Britain, they are not joining his vision. And he realizes that if no one is going to do it from above, he's going to do it from below. And that is also a great moment for the tenacity of Herzl. The fact that he's rejected multiple times, and basically he constantly finds new ways to promote the vision. If he's not going to get funding by any kind of major Jewish philanthropists, he's one of the first crowdsourcing, the person who basically did crowdsourcing for Zionism and says, okay, if it's not going to come from above, it's going to come from below. And 1897 also presents a dramatic moment for him where the people that he wanted to adopt Zionism, people like him, that kind of were from Central and Western Europe, highly kind of educated, acculturated, what you could say even assimilated, they don't adopt his vision. And the people that do adopt his vision are the kind of the lowly Eastern European Jews, which always I have in parentheses kind of makes me kind of laugh when you have all these culture wars in Israel today, and those lowly European Jews are kind of made to be some kind of aristocracy, which I think Herzl would have really appreciated, because it's something that Herzl didn't want to do, but he does. And that's part of his greatness, that he understands that the audience for Zionism is not going to be found in Western and Central Europe, and that it's going to be the lowly Eastern European Jews who are going to support his vision. They're the ones that are coming in the greater representation to the First Zionist Congress. And you see it in his books between the Jewish state and Alt-Neuland. He essentially turns to the Jews of Eastern Europe and elevates them. He elevates them in Alt-Neuland, which he didn't do in the Jewish state. And again, that's part of his ability to also just rewrite his vision and to adapt it to the changing circumstances. Now, what are some of the things that I think are important to know about the First Zionist Congress? First of all, one of my favorite things about the date is that the first kind of meeting of the Bund, the non-Zionist organization, the organization that believed that Jews should pursue some elements of linguistic and national self-determination, but that the homeland was essentially the Pale of Settlement. That's happening on the same year of the First Zionist Congress. And I think today we tell a wrong story about kind of the success and triumph of Zionism, especially in light of Israel's independence. We tell a story of clear inevitability, meaning Herzl wrote a book, there's a Congress, there's a Balfour Declaration, there's a state of Israel, that's it. And at every given moment, nothing was assured, nothing was inevitable. And certainly Zionism, of all the contenders at the end of the 19th century, emancipation and assimilation and socialism and communism and Bundism, and of course kind of Haredi rejecting Judaism, they're all competing to respond essentially to the Jewish question, to how to be a Jew who responds to modernity. And Zionism is the least likely to succeed if there was a yearbook from that year. So the notion that Zionism's success was preordained is not at all clear in 1897. It's a fringe movement. It's a crazy idea. Most people believe that Dr. Herzl has gone mad at this point. So it's important to really place it at the time as the idea of responding to the challenge of modernity that is the most fringe and least likely to succeed and really quite crazy. Another thing that I think is important to remember about the Congress is, as I'm sure you know, in Israel, Herzl is known as José HaMedina, the visionary of the state, the person who envisioned it, who saw it. And that, of course, is very limited. That is also very well emphasized in Polisar's course, really, that he was an institution builder, that he was a diplomat, that he set up the diplomatic situation, the funding, the institutions. But I want to talk a bit about the vision in actually its most palpable sense. Herzl, as you know, and I don't think it's a coincidence, was a dramatist. He didn't really set out to be the visionary of the modern state of Israel. That was not his life plan. He wanted to be a German playwright. And he brings to Zionism this kind of sensitivity of a playwright, of someone who stages things. And what he understood with the First Zionist Congress is that the best way to get the Jews to believe in the possibility of Zionism, of a Jewish state, is to enable them to actually see it with their own eyes. So when you talk about Herzl as the visionary of the modern state of Israel, it has a very practical element. He actually took upon himself to help Jews envision the state. That's what the Congress was all about. He made sure that there's a flag, that there is music, that everyone will wear frocks, that they will wear kind of evening attire. So all of these things were designed to create a situation. He himself, of course, was visually, you hear it from all the records, he was visually very appealing, had the look of the king of the Jews. So what he allowed those Jews to do by kind of convening them, creating the high drama of being kind of the parliament, is that he allowed them to look kind of left and right and to say, okay, we can imagine that. We can see this happening. And that was a big part of what Herzl was able to do. He was able to, through this kind of act of drama, allow people to really see with their own eyes what the parliament of a Jewish state, which is what the Zionist Congress essentially was the forerunner of, what it will look like. And finally, I want to, for this date, to just say kind of, you know, a lot of people, you'll see it on campus, something will be like, what is Zionism? And they'll be like, oh, it's so complicated. And just, I want to give you the definition because I always say it's really simple. Zionism is the political movement for self-determination of the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland. And of course, each part of it is important. It's a political movement, and that's what the Zionist Congress does. It is a moment of political organization. I don't like it when people say Zionism is a 3,000-year-old movement. The connection between the people of Israel and the land of Israel is unbroken and millennia old. But Zionism is a political movement of a particular time, because if you say that it's a 3,000-year-old movement, you're making a historical claim. Because why did the state of Israel emerge in the 20th century, not the 15th or the 10th? So it's a political movement for self-determination, liberation of the Jewish people. This is the big drama that Herzl kind of does in his first book, in The Jewish State. He basically says we are a people, one people. And with that, he kind of declares the entire project of emancipation, of being Jews or Germans of the Mosaic faith, a failure. And as a people, the Jews have the right to self-determination. And if the Jews are a people and they're going to exercise self-determination, there's only one land where that's going to be relevant, and that's Zion, the land of Israel. And that also goes to the fact that Zionism really has three parents. One is clearly the ancient connection between the Jewish people and Zion, but the other two, and that speaks to that particular moment, to 1897, is the betrayal and failure of emancipation, the real sense that Europe will not be able to live up to its ideals of emancipating and integrating the Jews as full equals into European society. The rise of anti-Semitism is what convinces Herzl ultimately of that. And the third parent, of course, is the fall of empires and the rise of nation states. This is important because a lot of people pretend as if a Jewish state is some kind a unique abomination. But if you read texts from that time, and the idea of a Zionist Congress, Herzl did not invent it. There were a lot of congresses taking place at that time of peoples beginning to imagine and think of self-determination. And if you read texts at the time, they speak of the Ukrainians and the Poles and the Slovaks and the Czechs and the Jews. And it's clear to everyone that the Jews are a people no less than all these others. So these are the things that I think I would like you to know from about 1897. So then we go to 1917, the Balfour Declaration. Now, again, here we'll make a connection with Herzl. You know, people often talk about Herzl and the Uganda or Kenya plan as a mistake, but for two reasons, Herzl was absolutely right. The first is, and that's Herzl's genius, he understands at the end of the 19th century, when emancipation in Vienna is at its height, the Jews are essentially Vienna. They are the arbiters of cultural taste. There are its journalists, its business people. At that moment of greatest Jewish integration, Herzl understands that the ground in Europe is burning. And he understood that the Jews had to be evacuated. And he was right. And he never ever thought that the Jewish state will not be in Zion, but he did think that if it cannot be, if the Ottoman Empire will not allow it, and at the time it was still the Ottoman Empire, then the Jews must at least evacuate Europe. And of course, he was right. The other thing, and that's also in Paul Asar's course, is to argue that essentially Herzl created the diplomatic basic for the Balfour Declaration, because by discussing with the British the idea of a kind of Jewish home, even if a temporary home, in a place that was controlled by Britain at the time, he actually established the link that later allowed Weizmann and Goldman to pursue with the British and the French the idea that the Jews will have a national home, this time in their ancestral homeland. Now, what do I want you to know about the Balfour Declaration? A few years ago, when we were marking 100 years to the Balfour Declaration, and the Palestinians were engaged in another bizarre effort, this time to get the British to apologize for the Balfour Declaration, I gave a talk, and the title of the talk was, "Thank You, Lord Balfour. We'll take it from here." Now, the Balfour Declaration is remarked in Zionist history as important, but read the declaration. It doesn't say much. It says that His Majesty's government views with favor, which is nice, but what is it? It's not much. And my argument at the time still is that the state of Israel was established thanks to deliberate Jewish Zionist action. And without that, the Balfour Declaration would have been a forgotten declaration. One of, we had Napoleon, and we had various American presidents, people who in the 18th and 19th century raised the idea of a Jewish homeland, of a revived Jewish homeland. But if the Jews had not actually taken action, then it would have been meaningless. And the fact that some people, the Palestinians and others, think that that declaration created the Jewish state, a kind of godlike, creation through the word, that is pretty much the opposite of what really happened in history. So I want to first bring that as something that's important. The other thing is, of course, as I said, one of the parents of Zionism is the collapse of empires and the rise of nation states or states based on the principle of self-determination. The Balfour Declaration really becomes important when it becomes part of the British mandate. And here, again, it's important to understand what the British mandate really is. At the end of World War I, the British and the French are on the victorious side. And they still believe that they're living in a colonial age, one ruled by European colonial empires, and they plan to take the lands of the now defunct Ottoman Empire as their own. And as you know, they engage in various discussions on how to divide the lands of the Ottoman Empire between the French and the British. However, enter the Americans. The Americans basically consider themselves the ones who had made it possible for the British and the French to be victorious. And as far as the Americans are concerned, the age of empire is over. Certainly the age of European empires is to be over. And they are not willing to let the French and the British take the Ottoman lands as basically colonial loot. They want to promote, this is Wilson's idea, to promote the idea of self-determination for peoples. Now, as the professor Aris Manella wrote in The Wilsonian Moment, Wilson meant that for the people of Europe, but he unintentionally inspired other peoples around the world. And the peoples of the Ottoman Empire, the Kurds, the Armenians, the Turks, the Arabs, and the Jews also intended to have self-determination. But again, the French and the British were not interested in the idea of self-determination for peoples. And the mandate was essentially the American compromise between the British and French desire for continued colonial rule on new lands and the idea that what needs to replace the European colonial project is self-determination. So again, there was no question that the peoples of the Ottoman Empire, Arabs and Jews, Turks, Armenians and Kurds, have the right to self-determination. There was no question that the Jews have the right to self-determination in that land. And the mandate system was basically conceived as a kind of form of interim tutelage. Yes, the British and the French will get to rule, but they don't really get to rule. They get to be interim tutors for the local peoples who, unlike the Europeans, need a little help to learn how to be free and sovereign. Of course, if you read the British and French text, they considered the mandate system merely a continuation of colonialism, but if the local peoples did not, they considered it indeed the process of self-determination. As I'm sure you know, the Turks pretty much ripped up the idea of Kurdish and Armenian self-determination. They did what they did to both peoples. Turkey emerged twice the size of what was initially allocated to it. The Kurds still don't have a state, maybe now a bit, and the Armenians have it ultimately in another place. And I always say this could have been the Jewish fate. So again, if we go to this theme of non-inevitability, the fate of the Jews could have been like that of the Armenians of the Kurds. Again, a kind of footnote where, yes, there were beautiful promises and even a whole conference and a mandate, but no state. So that's the other thing that I wanted to emphasize, the kind of the transition from empires to states based on the principle of self-determination, mediated by this interim compromise of the mandate system. And finally, this is a great opportunity to talk about the word Palestine. As I'm sure you know, the mandate is called the Mandate for Palestine. It has in it language that says recognizing the historic connection of the Jewish people with Palestine, because 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, and this was a unanimous mandate, it was clear that Palestine was merely the Roman and therefore the Christian and therefore the European and therefore the colonial name for the piece of territory where the Jewish, Judean, and Israelite kingdoms once stood, that this was the geography of the Holy Land. So it was clear that what is being recognized is the historic connection of the Jewish people with that land, with Palestine. And that connection in the mandate is phrased as the grounds for reconstituting the Jewish homeland. Re doesn't appear in any other mandate, not for the ones that established Iraq and Jordan and Syria and Lebanon, because it was understood that the Jews in Palestine are reconstituting a national home. As my colleague, Dr. Shani Moore, says, that Palestine was used politically twice, ending Jewish kingdoms by Emperor Adrian and reestablishing a Jewish homeland. And I'm sure many of you have seen various memes on the internet of people saying, oh, look, Palestine existed, and they show an image of the Palestine football team as some match in the 1920s or 30s, and then you zoom in on the image of the Palestine football team, and the names are Goldman and Kraut, and because they're all Jewish, and Palestine, certainly in the 20s and 30s, is associated with the project of reconstituting a Jewish national home. So those are the things that I want, that I think are important to understand about the Balfour Declaration and how it feeds into the mandate system. And finally, 1947. Here, I'm happy to see, well, before, yeah, see the slide. Thank you, Avi. Okay. So what you see here in the slide is you see the map of partition, the plan of partition. Of course, it says Palestine. This is the mandate for Palestine. That's the two-toned map, and the blue and dark blue map are the incidents of malaria in the land in the early 20th century. As you can notice, I'm not a visual person. I don't have presentations. I vowed in the mid-90s to not use PowerPoints or slide decks, but this is such a powerful visual that I've come to use it more and more. So before I go to it more specifically, we need to understand that in 1947, the Arabs can clock numerous successes from their perspective. It's not how we think of it, but we should. As a result of the Great Arab Revolt from 36 to 39, and I want to recommend the book by Oren Kessler, Palestine 1936, about that period. The Arab Revolt, even though it leaves kind of the Arabs of the land of Israel quite devastated at the end of it, they achieve the political goal. And the political goal is to prevent the establishment of a Jewish state. Recently, I say it for every Holocaust Remembrance Day, that the early Zionists imagined a Jewish state not so that never again, but so that never at all. The tragedy of the Shoah, in addition to itself, is that, again, Herzl had the vision, understood the ground was burning. The Zionists established the foundations of a state. It was all ready to emerge in the 1930s, like other states. Imagine a world where Golda who was at the Evian conference in 1938, where everyone said they didn't want Jews except Jamaica a bit. Imagine she could have spoken up and said, no, we want them and we have a state for them. But the Arab revolt prevented a Jewish state from coming into being in the 1930s. As a result, I always emphasize that the Arabs bear a responsibility for at least the scale of the Holocaust, because without it, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Jews would have had a state to which they could flee. And again, I know that because only a decade or two later, when the Arab world goes through this process of empires receding, countries being established, turning on the Jews have a state of Israel, and the Arab world experiences only an ethnic cleansing rather than the genocide, the Holocaust that happened in Europe. So the Arabs are successful. They were able to prevent the establishment of a Jewish state, which was their goal. They were able to close the gates of the embryonic Jewish state to Jewish immigration at the most dire time for the Jewish people. And as a result, after the Holocaust, contrary to this view that I've come to call Zionism denial, the bizarre view that European nations felt guilty after the Holocaust and they gave the Jews the land, which has nothing to do with reality. There was certainly no guilt. The overwhelming sense was that there will not be a Jewish state, again, emphasizing the theme of non-inevitability of Zionism in a Jewish state. The sense was that there will not be a Jewish state for the simple reason that there were no Jews. And this is what leads the Zionist leadership to understand that they need to adopt and go for partition. And look at the partition map. It actually shows you that all the Zionist mythologies are correct. This is why I love this visual. It basically shows you that the lands that the United Nations allocates to a Jewish state. And by the way, if you ever wondered why was this discussed in the United Nations, it was discussed in the United Nations because Britain failed to carry out the terms of the mandate, and the United Nations basically received the mandate from the League of Nations. So the vote goes back to the heir of the League of Nations, the United Nations. That's why there's a vote in the UN General Assembly. So what the UN allocates are essentially the lands that the Jews reclaimed from Malaria. Look it up. It was a joint project by the Joint Distribution Committee and a Zionist scientist named Israel Kligler. And it was such a success that this was something that the British wrote about. And by the way, it led to a population explosion of the Arabs because the entire land was malarial. The light blue is also malaria. The dark blue is just basically where it was uninhabited malaria land, but it led basically to no more babies dying, and as a result to the population explosion among the Arabs, which led to the libel that the Jews were stealing Arab land. But no, you can see they purchased the uninhabitable land, eradicated malaria, and that plus the Negev desert, so malaria and desert, are the lands that the UN allocates to the Jews. This is, of course, the original, or after the one, the Peel Plan is the major two-state solution, a Jewish state and an Arab state. And of course, the Arabs rejected. And look, the Jews, even though it's a rump state, malaria, eradication land, and desert, the Jews danced hora on that day because they wanted a state. That was what they imagined 50 years earlier. And the Arabs, as they make it clear, are more determined that the Jews have nothing rather than they have something, even though it's a success. They were able to get the UN to vote for another Arab state on the lands of the Ottoman Empire. But that is still not good enough because they are more determined that the Jews have nothing than that they have something. And basically, from this moment on, I must say, it all becomes just details. We still are in the same conflict where the Jews want a state and the Arabs want the Jews not to have a state. And that is essentially the story. The key three moments in Zionism, I think if you know those three, plus you know them through the prism that I think they should be understood, you're prepared to go out there.
We have a question that was sent in to us by one of our Tikvah students in Michigan. She writes, I'm curious how the collective memory of the Shoah and other historical traumas shaped Israeli national identity and its foreign policy decisions. In what ways might these memories be evolving across different generations?
It's really ultimately difficult to say because, as I said, it has numerous kind of different effects. So, for example, if you look at the early Zionists, not Herzl, but the ones who are kind of the building the land and the foundations, at least some of them thought they had time because Zionism was not just about the political project of a Jewish state, it was also about a whole philosophical, emotional project of creating a new kind of Jew, of negating the exile, not just in the sense of moving to the land of Israel, but negating this kind of the way of life of the exile, the kind of the meek Jew who is at the mercy of others. And what the Shoah basically did to Israel, it forced it a kind of an emergency mode rather than kind of the slow evolution that some of them wanted. And as a result, in many ways, you could argue that still we're working through this Zionist revolution and how everyone becomes an Israeli. It remains the very fraught attitude that Israel and Zionism have with the idea of Jews living outside of Israel, with the idea of exile. Of course, it feeds into the very day-to-day understanding that threats to the Jewish people should be taken seriously, to the understanding that Jews do play a kind of oversized role in both Western, Russian, Islamic civilizations. And as a result, those civilizations go through periods in history where they believe that the world would be a better place without the collective Jew. I talk a lot about how anti-Zionism builds through the equation of Zionism, Israel, and the Star of David with every single evil word, so as to create this nursery rhyme repetition in people's mind of Israel, Zionism equals evil, ultimately leading people, and that's also to Nathan's question, leading people who are young and believe themselves seeking to do good in the world. And again, we have by now raised one, if not two generations of Jews who believe that to be Jewish is merely to do good in the world, tikkun olam, social justice. And as a result, since they've been told by now for decades that Israel's Zionism, Star of David, is evil and it was laundered and legitimized through international institutions and academia, you are susceptible to the idea that to do good, you need to eradicate that evil. And after October 7th, a new placard appeared that said, keep the world clean. And I remember with an image of a flag of Israel or a Star of David in a trash bin. And I remember reflecting that the greatest failure, or one of the greatest failures of Holocaust education, is that people might know a lot about the death camps and Nazis, but how many can articulate the simple insight that everything the Nazis did was downstream from that simple idea, keep the world clean. The idea that there is a clean world, a beautiful world, a utopia, and what stands between this dirty, messy world and utopia is the collective Jew, which therefore has to be by any means necessary, you heard that a lot after October 7th too, to be placed in this global trash bin. And I think Jews are, certainly in Israel, are keenly aware that that is actually a plan. Much of my criticism of the Israeli government is that we actually did not sufficiently respect the Palestinians and their ideology as being about that, and the fact that it was sustained and fueled by global support for the idea of keep the world clean. I'm sure a lot of you have been looking at these kind of placards that have been seen over certainly last year and a half, but even before, queers for Palestine, feminists for Palestine, Palestine is worker rights, Palestine is fighting against climate change. And you think, okay, they're morons. Don't they know how homosexuals are treated in Gaza? But they're not morons. They're actually operating based on a very powerful logic. And the logic is this: all the evil words are made to be associated, right? Apartheid, colonialism, racism, then it escalates Nazism, genocide, ethnic cleansing. All the evil words become associated with Israel, Zionism, Star of David through this endless repetition, what have come to call the placard strategy. And all the good words, freedom, equality, justice, rights, are associated with the erasure of the collective Jew, with Palestinianism, with from the river to the sea. So once you understand that Palestine has become an abstract marker of utopia, because it represents the world where the collective Jew, certainly the sovereign Jew, the Jew who dared imagine himself or herself, sovereign, free, liberated, master of their own fate, and contravention of the role that was assigned to them by Western or part of Western Christian Islamic civilization. Palestinianism, Palestine, is the abstract marker of the erasure of that collective Jew, and therefore it represents utopia. And then everything that a person thinks is utopia, they're going to combine it with Palestine. So there's actually a powerful and dangerous logic there. And my criticism of our government is that we were actually not sufficiently keenly serious about understanding how dangerous and dedicated this ideology is. So I would say at the end of the day, the biggest impact is that we are keenly aware of the fact that even with all our power and military, we are a minority, a small people surrounded by at least substantial groups of people who believe that the world would be a better place if you eradicated the collective Jew.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilf, for offering us your insights. And thank you to the audience for joining us tonight. Thank you. Good night.